Two little girls cleaned dishes for food until a millionaire heard them crying. The clatter of dishes echoed through the narrow alley behind the food stall, harmonizing with the hiss of the fryer and the murmured hum of the city preparing for nightfall. Two little girls stood barefoot by the sinks, sleeves rolled up, hands red from the cold water. The older one, barely 10, scrubbed a greasy pan with practiced urgency, while the younger, around 7, struggled with a stack of chipped plates. Their cheeks were smudged with soap bubbles and exhaustion, but their eyes, those wide, determined eyes, held no complaints. Every evening, after the crowd thinned and the last bowl of noodles had been sold, they appeared like clockwork. Mr. Han, the stall owner, never asked where they came from. He only nodded toward the dishes, and the girls got to work. In return, he let them sit on upside-down buckets in the corner and served them a modest plate of rice and vegetables. It was more kindness than most had shown them. That night, as the neon signs flickered on and the air turned crisp, a man in a tailored coat sipped soup at a table nearby. His name was Dominic Leclerc, a reclusive millionaire known in the business world for his icy precision and in the tabloids for his tragic past. He was in town on business, avoiding attention in this modest food alley, content with anonymity and steam rising from his bowl. He noticed the girls as they arrived, how the older one gently guided the younger with a protective hand, how they didn't speak unless necessary, how they worked with the solemnity of grown women. It pricked something in his chest, but he turned back to his meal, dismissing it as a flicker of misplaced sentiment. Inside the kitchen, behind a battered wall of cracked tiles, the younger girl dropped a bowl. It shattered, loud and sharp. She flinched and immediately bent to pick up the pieces, whispering frantic apologies. The older one rushed to help her, crouching low, her hands trembling. "I'm sorry, Lila," the little one whimpered. "I didn't mean to. Please don't let him stop giving us food." "No, it's okay, Em," Lila whispered back, but her voice broke. "It's okay, I'm just tired. So tired." And then it came, the quiet, choking sobs they had held back for weeks. Pressed against each other, hidden from view, they wept as children too brave for their years sometimes do, in secret and in silence, until the dam cracks. Dominic froze mid-bite. At first he thought it was a trick of the wind, but the sound came again, soft, stifled crying from behind the stall. Not the tantrums of spoiled children, but the deep, aching sorrow of souls carrying too much weight. He looked toward the kitchen, heart suddenly hammering. He had heard that sound before. He stood slowly, leaving his half-finished meal on the table. His shoes crunched softly on gravel as he moved toward the side of the stall, careful not to draw attention. The stall owner, distracted with cleaning, didn't notice him slip behind the partition. There, just beyond the kitchen door, he paused. Through a sliver between hanging curtains he saw them, two tiny figures crouched on the tile floor, clinging to each other. The older girl had her arms wrapped tightly around her sister, rocking her gently, as though shielding her from a world far too cruel. Dominic's throat tightened. The younger one hiccuped through her tears. "I miss Mommy," she said, barely audible. "I don't want to sleep in the boxes again tonight." Lila wiped her own tears away fiercely and pressed her forehead to her sister's. "We'll find a real bed one day. I promise, Emmy. Just a little longer." Dominic took a step back, his breath catching in his chest. The flickering neon light cast their silhouettes in soft shadows on the wall, small, fragile outlines that reminded him of another little girl, from another life. He turned away quickly, rubbing his hand down his face as if trying to scrub the memory from his skin. Back at his table, he sat in stunned silence. The world around him seemed to blur, the chatter, the smells, the night air all fading into a distant hum. He hadn't expected to feel anything tonight. He'd stopped expecting that a long time ago, but something in the way those girls clung to each other, the desperation in their whispered promises, pulled at an old wound that had never truly healed. When the girls finished and stepped out to collect their food, Dominic watched closely. Lila held the plate carefully, guiding Emmy to their corner. They sat together side by side, as if the warmth of each other could replace the absence of home. Emmy grinned when she saw two small dumplings on the rice, like it was a feast. Lila smiled too, though her eyes were rimmed with red. Dominic reached into his coat pocket and pulled out his wallet. He hesitated. He didn't want to scare them. People with money had passed them by every night, throwing coins into cups or ignoring them completely. But maybe he could do something different. He rose again and approached Mr. Han. The vendor looked up in surprise. "Another bowl, sir?" "No." "Who are those girls?" Dominic asked, nodding toward the sisters. Mr. Han scratched his head. "They just come to help every night. I give them food, don't know their names. They never ask for money." "Do they have parents?" The man shook his head. "Not that I've seen. I think they sleep in the alley across the street." Dominic turned his eyes back to them. Emmy was already nodding off against Lila's shoulder, and suddenly he knew. He couldn't walk away. Not this time. Not again. Later that night, long after the last lantern had been extinguished and the food stall closed, Dominic stood across the street, hands in his coat pockets. He watched as the two girls tiptoed down a narrow alley, their small figures vanishing behind a stack of cardboard boxes and blankets tucked beneath an awning. The city slept on, unaware or unwilling to notice, the children hiding in its crevices. He remained there for nearly an hour, unmoving. The memory of another child, his own daughter, surfaced with painful clarity. Her name had been Sophie. She would have been 10 this year, 10, like Lila. His thoughts spiraled. Years ago, when the custody battle with his estranged wife grew brutal and public, she had disappeared with their daughter. No contact, no clues, no closure. He had spent months searching, burning through private investigators and sleepless nights. But nothing. The silence that followed had hollowed him out. But tonight, something stirred in him again. The next morning, before the sun rose, Dominic returned to the alley. The girls were still asleep, curled together under a moth-eaten blanket. He didn't wake them. Instead, he left a note wrapped in a clean napkin, tucked beside a thermos of hot milk and 2 fresh buns he'd bought at the bakery down the street. "Come back to the stall tonight. I have work for you. Good work, safe work. D." Then he turned and walked away. That evening, the girls returned to the stall as usual, wary but curious. Mr. Han waved them over with a puzzled expression. "A man left this for you," he said, handing Lila the note and the now empty thermos. She unfolded the paper slowly, lips moving as she sounded out the words. Her hands trembled. Emmy peeked up at her. "What does it say?" Lila didn't answer right away. She read the message twice, then looked around the street. She spotted Dominic seated at a nearby bench, a gentle, unreadable expression on his face. Their eyes met. He nodded once, like a silent promise. Later that night, after the dishes were done, Dominic stepped forward. "I want to offer you a different job," he said carefully. "Something safer, somewhere warm to stay." Lila stiffened. "We're not beggars." "I know," he said. "You're workers. You're brave. That's why I'm asking." She looked at Emmy, then back at him. "Why do you care?" Dominic paused, the words caught in his throat. "Because once I lost someone, and I never got the chance to help her. I don't want to make the same mistake again." Lila didn't speak, but the fear in her eyes slowly shifted into something softer. Hope, maybe, or something dangerously close to it. Emmy tugged her sleeve. "Can we go, Lila? Just for a little?" And for the first time, Lila nodded. Dominic led them to a modest black car parked just down the street. He opened the back door and let the girls climb in first, watching as they clutched each other tightly on the leather seats, wide-eyed and silent. He gave the driver a quiet nod. "Take us to the Eastview apartments." The ride was smooth and quiet, the city lights casting streaks across the windows. Dominic glanced at them in the rearview mirror. Emmy had her head on Lila's shoulder again, her small hands still stained from dish soap. Lila, always alert, watched him carefully, like a lion cub unsure if she'd wandered into a trap or a den. The Eastview complex wasn't a mansion, but it was safe, clean, quiet, with a view of the city skyline. Dominic had kept a unit there for years, a place to retreat when business got too loud. The girls followed him hesitantly down the hallway, their shoes scuffing against the polished floor. He opened the door to a warm, softly lit apartment. A small sofa. A clean kitchen. A hallway leading to 2 bedrooms. Dominic stepped aside. "It's not much, but it's yours for now. You can rest here, eat, clean up. No strings." Emmy gasped when she saw the bathroom. "There's hot water?" she asked, like it was a miracle. Lila held her sister's hand tightly. "Why are you doing this?" she asked again, more firmly this time. Dominic sat down slowly at the dining table. "Because I see myself in you, and because no child should have to fight this hard just to eat." He stood and opened the refrigerator. "You'll find food here. Tomorrow we'll talk about school and work. If you want to stay, you can." Lila's voice was barely above a whisper. "What if we say no? Then I'll drive you back. No questions asked." The 2 girls huddled near the door, whispering back and forth. Dominic didn't eavesdrop. He knew they needed to decide on their own. Finally, Lila turned around. Her voice still carried the weight of too many hard nights, but her eyes held something different now. "We'll stay. For one night." Dominic nodded. "That's enough." He showed them to their room, small but warm, with 2 twin beds and a dresser. Emmy climbed in immediately, curling beneath the thick quilt with a sleepy sigh. Lila lingered at the doorway. "If you try to separate us," she said quietly, "I'll run." "I won't," he promised. "I swear it." She gave a single sharp nod and stepped inside. That night, Dominic stood outside their door, staring at the quiet hallway. Something in him had shifted. It wasn't just about helping them anymore. It was about something deeper. Some need to fill a space that had ached empty for far too long. He didn't know it yet, but bringing them home would unearth a secret that had been buried for nearly a decade, one that could shatter everything. The next morning, sunlight filtered gently through the windows, casting soft patterns on the floor. Dominic was already up, seated at the kitchen counter with a cup of black coffee cooling in his hand. He had barely slept, haunted by fragmented memories of Sophie. Her laugh, the curve of her cheek, the way she used to run to him after work, arms wide open. Every time he looked at Lila, he saw pieces of her. It was unsettling and unexplainable. The girls padded into the kitchen, barefoot and cautious. Emmy was already smiling, rubbing her eyes with the sleeve of a clean shirt she had found folded on the dresser. Lila was quieter, her eyes scanning the room like she was bracing for disappointment. "There's cereal," Dominic said, gesturing to the table. "Milk's cold, bowls are clean." Emmy ran over immediately, marveling at the colorful box. "We used to have this sometimes, when Mommy had her job." Lila sat more slowly, watching Dominic carefully. "Do we have to pay for this?" "No," he replied gently. "Just eat." They ate in silence, save for Emmy's delighted crunching. Dominic didn't press them with questions, though he had 1,000. Who were their parents? Where had they been living before the streets? Why did Lila's face, her voice, feel so achingly familiar? After breakfast, Dominic opened his laptop at the counter and quietly began searching. Police reports. Missing persons bulletins, family shelters. He scanned names, photos, birth dates, anything that might link them to a record, but nothing matched. That afternoon, he arranged for a trusted doctor to visit the apartment for a routine checkup. Lila resisted at first, arms crossed, but relented when Dominic let her stay in the room the entire time. Emmy was underweight, and Lila had an old scar on her shoulder that concerned the doctor, but neither had immediate health issues. As the girls rested in their room, Dominic sat on the edge of the sofa and picked up his phone. His thumb hovered over a contact he hadn't touched in years. Jessica Leclerc, ex-wife. He hadn't heard her voice since the day she vanished with Sophie. The police had suspected foul play at first, but then she sent a letter, brief, emotionless, terminating custody, saying she wanted nothing more to do with him or the life they'd built. She disappeared after that. No trace of Sophie. No forwarding address. His finger hovered, trembling. In the bedroom, Emmy laughed softly. Dominic looked up, startled. Her laugh, light, airy, familiar. He rose and moved toward the sound, standing just outside their door. Emmy was telling Lila a story about a dream she'd had, and Lila chuckled low and warm. Dominic pressed his hand to the wall. For a moment, his breath caught. That laugh. That voice. He closed his eyes. Could it be? Could one of them be? He didn't finish the thought. Not yet, but something in his gut twisted, unmistakable and raw. Tomorrow he would ask them their full names, and the truth, whatever it was, would finally begin to surface. Morning light spilled across the hardwood floor as Dominic stirred in his chair, the faint creak of leather waking him. He'd fallen asleep on the sofa, his laptop still open beside him, a dozen search tabs flickering with cold, unresolved leads. No matches, no records, just shadowy traces and empty paths. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something about the girls wasn't just familiar, it was personal. He rubbed his eyes and stood, stretching his back. From down the hallway, the muffled sound of giggling floated toward him. Emmy's voice, playful and light. It was the kind of sound that usually didn't survive the streets for long. Hearing it here in his home stirred something tender in him, a yearning he had buried long ago. He walked quietly to the kitchen and began making breakfast. Eggs, toast, a little fruit. He wasn't much of a cook, but he remembered Sophie had loved strawberries. He set a few on each plate and waited. The girls emerged a few minutes later, both freshly washed and dressed in the clothes he'd left out. Lila was wearing a soft grey sweater that hung slightly off one shoulder. Emmy had her hair tied back in two clumsy little pigtails. Dominic smiled despite himself. "Good morning," he said, handing each of them a plate. Emmy beamed. "This is like a hotel." Lila sat more cautiously, her eyes darting from the food to Dominic, always measuring. As they ate, he cleared his throat gently. "Can I ask you something?" Lila's fork paused mid-air. "I want to know your full names," he said softly. "If that's okay." Emmy answered first, her mouth full of toast. "I'm Amelia. Amelia Rose." She turned to her sister. "Tell him yours." Lila hesitated. Then, almost too quietly to hear, she said, "Lila Grace Monroe." Dominic froze. Grace. It hit him like a cold wind across the chest. That name, Grace, was his mother's name, not common, and certainly not random. He kept his voice steady. "Monroe, that was your mother's last name?" Lila nodded slowly. "Her name was Natalie Monroe. She died almost a year ago." Dominic's heart stuttered. Natalie Monroe. The name wasn't familiar, but Grace, and the timing, and their ages. "What about your father?" he asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Lila shook her head. "We never met him." Mom never talked about him. Emmy doesn't even remember. Dominic felt the air go still around him. Lila Grace, Amelia Rose. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed was one he didn't yet dare to believe. Somewhere in the deepest corners of his memory, a moment surfaced, a whispered argument with Jessica years ago, just before she disappeared. Accusations. A name scribbled on a crumpled note. Something about betrayal. Something about Natalie. His hand trembled on the edge of the counter. Could these girls be connected to her? Could they be his? Dominic's fingers gripped the edge of the counter until his knuckles whitened. The name Natalie Monroe echoed in his mind, stirring memories he had long buried beneath years of silence and grief. He needed answers, real answers, not just fragments of coincidence and familiar names, but the fear of discovering something irreversible made it hard to breathe. The girls continued eating, unaware of the storm behind his eyes. "Do you have any photos of your mother?" he asked gently, trying to sound casual. Lila paused, then nodded. She reached into the pocket of her sweater and pulled out a worn, folded photograph. The edges were creased, corners curled from years of careful handling. She handed it over, eyes watching his reaction. Dominic took it with trembling hands and unfolded it. His breath caught. It was a woman with soft, intelligent eyes holding a baby. Emmy, he realized instantly. Beside her stood a young Lila, no more than 3 or 4, clinging to her mother's hand. But what made the room spin was the woman's face, Natalie Monroe. She looked almost exactly like Jessica's best friend from years ago. Dominic remembered her now, a quiet, graceful presence at dinners and social events, always kind, always polite. They'd never been close, but he had shared a few conversations with her during the final months of his marriage. What he hadn't known, what Jessica never told him, was that Natalie had vanished around the same time she did. He looked up at Lila. "Do you know where that photo was taken?" She shrugged. "I think in the apartment before this one place in Garden Lane. That's the only one I remember." Dominic folded the photo carefully and handed it back. His heart raced. He needed help. This was beyond guesswork now. He excused himself briefly and stepped into the hallway, dialing the number of a private investigator he hadn't used in years. "Find everything you can on Natalie Monroe. Past addresses, employment, anything." "Anything in particular?" the voice on the other end asked. Dominic hesitated. "Check for hospital records, birth certificates, and run a paternity match, quietly. Cross-reference with the names Lila Grace Monroe and Amelia Rose Monroe." He hung up and leaned against the wall, his mind spinning. If what he suspected was true, then the truth had been hidden from him not once, but twice. Natalie Monroe. Had she been pregnant when she left? Had Jessica known? When he returned to the kitchen, Lila was clearing the plates while Emmy danced barefoot across the tile floor, humming a tune she had made up. Dominic watched them, a hollow ache blooming in his chest. They weren't just children he had saved from the cold. They were pieces of a life stolen from him. He sat down slowly, heart thudding, eyes locked on Lila as she dried her hands. He had to be sure, but deep down, he already was. Later that afternoon, while the girls napped curled together on the couch beneath a thick throw blanket, Dominic sat in his study, staring at his laptop screen. His fingers hovered above the keyboard, replaying every moment of the past few days like frames in a slow-burning film. Every gesture, every word, every glance from Lila, all of it pointed to something bigger than chance. He opened a secured file folder on his desktop, a collection of documents he hadn't touched in years. Inside, among custody papers and court transcripts, was a single unsent letter addressed to his daughter Sophie. He had written it the night Jessica vanished, pouring his heart into words he never believed she would read. "I'm still here. I never gave up on you." He blinked hard and closed the file. Then his phone buzzed. It was the investigator. "I ran the search," the voice said without preamble. "Natalie Monroe lived under an alias for a few years. She worked in a small library outside the city and had 2 daughters. Names match. No birth certificates were filed in the usual state records, but I found hospital registration from a private clinic. Lila Grace was born 10 years ago." Dominic's heart jumped. "Does it say who the father is?" There was a pause. "Father's name is listed as Dominic Leclerc." The room spun. He sank into the chair, his mind racing. "So it's real, Yes. But there's more. Natalie moved 3 times in 5 years. No family contact listed. No social services. Then, about a year ago, a fire was reported at an apartment complex under her name. No police investigation, but her death was noted by a local clinic. No funeral. No next of kin." Dominic gripped the phone. "What about the girls? Neighbors said they disappeared after the fire. No one filed missing person reports. It's like they fell off the grid." Dominic swallowed hard. "Thank you." He ended the call and sat in silence, his breath shallow. He was their father. Natalie had never told him. Jessica had hidden it. And now, fate, or perhaps something more, had placed the girls in his path without either of them knowing the truth. Suddenly, footsteps shuffled in the hall. Emmy appeared, rubbing her eyes, her cheeks flushed from sleep. "Hi," she said with a shy smile. "Hey, sweetheart," Dominic replied, voice trembling. She climbed into his lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. Her tiny arms wrapped around his neck, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "You smell like pancakes," she whispered, giggling. He held her close, burying his face in her hair, the scent of childhood and innocence enveloping him. Lila appeared next, standing in the doorway with that same guarded look. Dominic looked at her, really looked, and saw everything he had missed: her jawline, her eyes, her strength, his daughter. But he couldn't say it yet, not without breaking everything they thought they knew, not without her choosing to trust him first. The evening passed slowly, filled with quiet routines and unspoken tension. Dominic prepared dinner, spaghetti, something simple, and the girls helped set the table. Emmy chatted about a dog she once saw at a park, while Lila moved carefully, her eyes drifting often toward Dominic, trying to read the thoughts behind his composed face. They ate together like a real family, though none of them said it aloud. Afterward, Emmy insisted on helping with dishes. Dominic offered to do them, but she stood on a stool, sleeves rolled up, grinning like it was the most important job in the world. Lila dried beside her, and Dominic couldn't stop watching them, how synchronized they were, how close. When the dishes were done, Emmy settled on the couch with a book, and Lila sat across from Dominic at the dining table, fidgeting with a napkin. "I need to ask you something," she said quietly. Dominic leaned in. "Anything." "Why do you care?" she asked again, more pointed this time. "There are so many kids on the street. Why us?" Dominic exhaled slowly. He couldn't tell her everything, not yet, but he couldn't lie either. "I lost someone," he said, "a daughter, years ago. She was taken from me, and I never found her. When I heard you cry, something in me knew I couldn't walk away." Lila's lips pressed into a line. "You think we remind you of her?" "No," he said. "I think you are her." Lila's eyes flickered. "What?" Dominic froze. The words had spilled out before he could stop them. "I mean," he said quickly, "you remind me of what she might have become, brave, fierce, loving." She didn't look convinced. Her fingers tightened on the napkin. "We're not anyone's charity case." "You're not," he said firmly. "You're family." The word lingered in the air like a drop of ink in water, spreading. Lila pushed her chair back and stood. "I don't know what you think this is, but we're not yours. We're just trying to survive." She turned away, heading toward the bedroom. "Lila," Dominic called gently, "wait." She stopped, back still turned. "Would you let me prove it? Not with money, not with food. Just let me be here. However you'll let me." She stood in silence for a long moment. Then, without looking back, she said, "You can try, but don't lie to us." Dominic nodded, even though she couldn't see it. "I won't." After she disappeared down the hall, he sat there alone, the weight of the past pressing down on him. He had found his daughters, but they didn't know it yet, and when the truth came out, it would shatter the fragile safety they'd just begun to feel. Unless he could find a way to tell them gently, unless they were ready to hear it. That night, Dominic stood by the window, staring at the city lights with a tumbler of untouched scotch in his hand. His reflection in the glass looked older than he remembered. Tired eyes, weight on his shoulders, a past too heavy to carry much longer. Behind him, the apartment was quiet. Emmy had fallen asleep, curled against a pillow on the couch, and Lila had retreated to the room, the door slightly ajar. He knew he couldn't keep the truth from them forever. Every second he waited risked building a wall of mistrust that might never come down. But he also couldn't just tell them. Not yet. The weight of their reality had already been too much. They had known hunger, fear, and grief. To find out that the man offering them shelter wasn't a stranger, but a father they never knew existed, it would upend everything. He set the glass down, untouched, and walked toward the bookshelf. He opened the small drawer at the bottom, rummaging through old papers, until he found what he was looking for, a small velvet box. Inside was a bracelet, gold, delicate, with a tiny engraved charm in the shape of a rose. It had been a gift, a secret one. He had given it to Natalie Munro once, after a quiet conversation in a garden behind his old townhouse. They had been friends, close friends, closer than they should have been, especially with Jessica drifting away. He stared at the bracelet. Natalie had kept it all these years. He knew it now with certainty because Emmy's middle name wasn't a coincidence. Emilia Rose, a name Natalie had chosen not just for beauty, but for memory. Dominic closed the box and slid it into his pocket. Tomorrow he would give it to them. In the girls' room, Lila lay awake, staring at the ceiling. She wasn't sure why, but her chest felt tight, like something big was about to happen. She trusted Dominic more than she thought she would. He hadn't made them feel small. He hadn't asked them for anything, but he looked at her sometimes like he knew her, like he had always been looking for her. She turned over and watched Emmy sleep, her little chest rising and falling peacefully. What if this man wasn't just a kind stranger? What if he was part of the story their mother never told them? A knock at the door startled her. Dominic's voice came through soft. "Can I come in?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Okay." He entered slowly and sat at the edge of her bed, careful not to wake Emmy. "I wanted to give you something," he said, pulling the box from his pocket. She opened it and stared. "Why does it have a rose?" she asked. He swallowed. "Because your mother once told me if she ever had a daughter, she'd name her after something strong and beautiful." Lila looked up at him, confusion dawning in her eyes. "How do you know that?" Dominic didn't answer immediately. He reached out and gently placed the bracelet in her palm. And in that moment, something shifted in Lila's heart, something she wasn't ready to name, but could no longer deny. Morning came with a quiet stillness. The city outside stirred to life slowly, but inside the apartment, time seemed to move differently, heavier, more deliberate. Lila sat at the kitchen table, the bracelet still clutched in her hand. She hadn't slept, not really. She just watched it, turning it over and over, her fingers tracing the tiny engraved rose as if it might whisper answers. Dominic moved carefully around the kitchen, making tea instead of coffee this time. He glanced at her, saw the exhaustion in her posture, the storm behind her eyes. He didn't push. Instead, he poured the tea into a mug and set it in front of her. "I don't understand," she finally said. "Why would she have something like this if it came from you?" He took a seat across from her, folding his hands. "Your mother and I, we knew each other. A long time ago." Lila's brow furrowed. "But you said you lost your daughter." "I did," he said quietly. "I thought I had. Her name was Sophie." "But now I know Natalie never told me." Lila froze. "Told you what?" Dominic took a breath, steadying himself. "That she had a child. That she had you." Lila stared at him. Her voice dropped, raw and trembling. "You're saying you're my father?" "Yes." The word landed like a crack of thunder. Lila sat back, stunned. The bracelet in her hand felt suddenly heavier. "No, that's not possible. She would have told us." "Maybe she wanted to. Maybe she didn't know how. Maybe she was protecting you." "She wouldn't lie." "I'm not saying she lied. I think she ran. And in running, she left behind more than she meant to." Lila shook her head, eyes wide, breath quickening. "You can't just say that. You can't just show up and decide you're my father." "I haven't decided anything," Dominic said gently. "I found you. And then I looked into it. I had to be sure. And now I am." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "Why now? Why after all this time?" "Because fate is cruel, and sometimes kind," he whispered. "And because when I heard you crying behind that wall, something inside me broke. I didn't know why at first, but I know now." She stood abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor. "I don't know what to do with this." "You don't have to do anything," he said softly. "I'll still be here, no matter what you decide." Lila ran a hand through her hair, pacing. "Does Emmy know?" "No, I haven't told her." "She's just a kid." "I know, that's why I wanted to tell you first." She turned away, wiping her face. The bracelet hung loose in her hand now, swinging with her every breath. From the hallway, a small voice called, "Lila?" Emmy stood there, rubbing her eyes. Lila turned, trying to compose herself, but Emmy's next words made her freeze. "Why are you crying like Mommy used to?" Lila knelt down quickly, wrapping her arms around Emmy before the little girl could ask anything more. "I'm okay," she whispered, her voice trembling despite her best effort to sound calm. "Just talking about Mommy." Emmy rested her head on Lila's shoulder. "I miss her." "I know," Lila murmured, squeezing her tighter. Dominic stood in the kitchen doorway, watching. He wanted to reach out to say something comforting, but he knew this moment belonged to them. For now, he was still on the outside of their bond. Lila stood slowly, taking Emmy's hand. "Let's get dressed, okay? We've got a big day." Dominic opened his mouth to speak, but stopped himself. He couldn't rush this. Every emotion unraveling in Lila now was something she had earned the right to process on her own terms. After breakfast, they took a quiet walk around a small park nearby. Emmy skipped ahead, chasing pigeons and kicking leaves. Lila walked beside Dominic, silent for a long time. "I don't remember you," she finally said. Dominic nodded. "You wouldn't. You were a baby when Natalie left." She never said anything. Not a name, not a hint. "I think she may have thought she was protecting you from a life you weren't meant to inherit." Lila looked at him. "What kind of life?" Dominic smiled faintly. "Complicated. Public. Often lonely despite the money." She studied him carefully. "You think that's why she left?" "I don't know. Maybe she loved you so much. She couldn't bear to risk losing you in a custody fight. Or maybe she thought I wouldn't want you." Lila's jaw tightened. "That sounds like her. Doing things on her own, carrying everything herself." "You're like her," he said softly. "Brave, quietly fierce." She didn't respond, but her expression softened. They stopped by a bench near a quiet pond. Emmy climbed up and swung her legs, smiling at ducks in the water. Dominic sat beside her. "Emmy," he said gently, "can I ask you something?" She nodded, chewing a strand of her hair. "Would it be okay if I told you a little story about a man who lost someone very special and then found something even more special years later?" Emmy tilted her head, curious. "Is it a sad story?" "A little," he admitted, "but it has a very beautiful ending." She smiled. "I like those." Dominic looked at Lila, who gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. And so he began. He told them, carefully, gently, about a man who once had a little girl with golden eyes, and how one day she disappeared. He told them about searching, hoping, and finally giving up, until the night he heard two little girls crying behind a kitchen wall. He didn't say it outright, but by the time he finished, Emmy leaned against him without hesitation, slipping her small hand into his. Lila sat quietly, tears streaking her cheeks, her fingers brushing the rose bracelet still wrapped around her wrist. And in the hush of the moment, surrounded by wind and water and the quiet miracle of reunion, she whispered the first word that would begin to change everything. "Dad?" The word hung in the air, fragile and tentative, like a glass ornament suspended mid-fall. Dominic's breath caught in his chest. He turned to Lila, unsure if he had imagined it. But she was looking at him, really looking at him, with eyes that held a storm of emotion, hope, fear, anger, and something deeper, something ancient and aching. "Say it again," he whispered. Lila hesitated, then her voice cracked as she repeated, "Dad." Tears stung Dominic's eyes. He reached across the bench, but stopped himself before touching her. He didn't want to scare her away. She had come to him, not the other way around. "I didn't think I'd ever hear that again," he said softly. "Not from anyone." Lila blinked quickly and looked away. "I don't know what to do with this. It doesn't fix everything." "I know," he said, "and I'm not asking for it to. I just want to be here, however you'll let me." Emmy, still nestled against his side, looked up with wide eyes. "So you're our real daddy?" Dominic looked down at her and nodded slowly. "Yes, sweetheart, I am." She blinked, thoughtful. "Do we have to call you that?" He smiled through the tightness in his throat. "Only if you want to." She seemed to consider this for a moment, then gave a small, satisfied nod. "Okay, but I'm still calling you Mister until I'm sure." Lila laughed, a real unguarded laugh, and Dominic's heart nearly shattered from the beauty of it. They spent the rest of the morning walking through the park. Dominic didn't try to force anything. He let Emmy collect acorns and tell stories about clouds. He let Lila walk a few steps behind, processing. When she was ready, she came closer, her shoulder brushing his now and then. Each little touch a step toward rebuilding something that had never been given the chance to exist. By the time they returned to the apartment, the mood had shifted. It wasn't healed, not yet, but it was lighter, hopeful. Dominic made lunch while the girls watched a cartoon on the couch. When he brought the sandwiches over, Lila looked up and asked, "What happens now?" "We go slow," he said. "No pressure, no big changes, just one day at a time." She nodded. "Okay." "And when you're ready," he added, "we talk about the past, about Natalie and what happened." Lila looked down at her sandwich. "There's a lot I don't know." "There's a lot I don't know either," Dominic said, "but we'll figure it out, together." She nodded again, more certain this time, but as they settled into the rhythm of something resembling normal, a shadow stirred at the edge of Dominic's memory. Jessica. She had vanished with Sophie. And now here were two daughters, one possibly conceived while Jessica was still in the picture. If she ever found out about Lila and Emmy, if she ever returned, what would she do? What secrets would she bring back with her? And more terrifying still, was she already watching? That night, after the girls had fallen asleep, Dominic sat alone in his study, the soft hum of the city bleeding in through the windows. He had barely touched his dinner. His mind churned with memories and questions he had locked away for nearly a decade. Jessica. His ex-wife's name was like a blade pressed gently to his throat. He hadn't spoken it aloud in years, hadn't dared dig into the mess she left behind when she vanished with their daughter, Sophie. The courts had closed the file. The world moved on. But Dominic had never truly stopped wondering. Why had she left? And now another question clawed its way to the surface. Had she known? Had Jessica discovered his connection to Natalie before she vanished? Had jealousy or betrayal driven her to run, not just with Sophie, but from the truth? He opened an old encrypted email server, one he hadn't accessed since the investigation. Inside, buried beneath layers of outdated threads, he found it. A message from Jessica, dated 1 week before she disappeared. No subject line, no greeting. Just a sentence. "You always loved the quiet ones. Let's see how quiet she stays when the truth comes out." Dominic's stomach turned. He'd dismissed it back then as another cryptic jab from a bitter ex. But now it read like a warning and a threat. If Jessica had known about Natalie's pregnancy, if she had figured out Dominic was the father, what else had she known? What had she done? He picked up his phone and called the private investigator again. "I need another search," he said without preamble. "Jessica Leclerc, last known location, any aliases she might have used. Look for ties to Natalie Monroe. Anything that connects them." "You think she's alive?" the voice asked. Dominic's jaw clenched. "I think she never stopped watching." He hung up and walked quietly to the girls' room. Emmy was fast asleep, one leg kicked out of the blanket, her stuffed bear tucked under her arm. Lila lay on her side, awake, her eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. She didn't speak when Dominic entered. She didn't have to. He sat beside her bed and leaned forward. "Lila, your mom. Did she ever talk about anyone named Jessica?" Lila blinked slowly. "Only once, a long time ago. She said, 'Some people you run from because they hurt you, and some because they scare you.'" Dominic's blood ran cold. Did she say why she was scared? "No," Lila whispered. "But after that, we moved again. She burned some papers, told me never to talk to strangers, said not all monsters look like monsters." Dominic exhaled slowly, steadying his hands. The past wasn't done with them. Jessica wasn't done. And if she was still out there, watching, waiting, then Lila and Emmy weren't just his daughters now. They were his to protect. The next morning brought a strange calm. Dominic made breakfast like usual, eggs, toast, a bit of fruit, but his movements were quieter, more focused. The weight of the night's discovery still pressed against his chest, but he masked it well. He had to. Lila and Emmy deserved peace, even if it was borrowed. The girls ate at the counter, giggling softly over a story Emmy made up about a duck who wore sunglasses. Lila glanced at Dominic occasionally, searching for signs of change. He offered warm smiles and nodded at her jokes, but his eyes held a different kind of alertness today. She noticed it. She just didn't know why. So after breakfast, he handed them each a backpack filled with new school supplies. "Thought we could go see the school today," he said. "It's close, quiet, good teachers." Lila hesitated. "We've never stayed in one place long enough to, start over." Dominic crouched in front of her, looking her in the eyes. "Then maybe it's time." She nodded slowly. They left the apartment around 10, Dominic holding Emmy's hand, while Lila walked on his other side. The school was just a few blocks away. Clean buildings, a modest playground, murals painted by students on the outer walls. It wasn't flashy, but it felt safe, familiar. The principal, a warm woman named Ms. Rowe, welcomed them into her office. Dominic had already sent over the enrollment forms, omitting sensitive details. He simply said he was the girl's guardian. Ms. Rowe smiled at Emmy, then Lila. "You're both very welcome here. We believe in second chances." Lila didn't speak, but her gaze softened. Back at the apartment, the girls unpacked their backpacks while Dominic retreated to his study. His phone buzzed on the desk, an encrypted call from the investigator. "She's alive," the man said before Dominic could speak. "Jessica Leclerc, living under the name Celeste Harmon, small coastal town about 4 hours south." Dominic's breath caught. "Has she tried to contact anyone?" "No, she's quiet. New name, new address, clean record." "But here's the thing, you're not her only point of interest." "What do you mean?" "She bought a storage unit 5 years ago. Surveillance footage shows her visiting it every few months. Guess whose name was on the access log 6 months ago?" Dominic's blood chilled. Natalie Monroe. Silence hung between them. "She knew," Dominic whispered. "Jessica knew about the girls. She met Natalie. And didn't tell you." "Or worse," Dominic said, heart racing. "She threatened her." He ended the call and stood slowly, rage and dread pulsing through his veins. The past wasn't just a memory, it had teeth. And if Jessica had manipulated Natalie, if she'd forced her into hiding, then Dominic's daughters had been on the run for a reason far more terrifying than poverty. From the hallway he heard Emmy's laughter, and then Lila's voice, strong, clear, just outside the door. "Dominic, there's a letter in my backpack. I don't know who it's from, but I think it's for you." His hands went cold. Everything was about to change. Dominic stared at the folded envelope in Lila's hand like it was a ticking bomb. The paper was yellowed, the corners bent. His name was written on the front in faded ink, Dominic Leclerc, in a handwriting he hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Natalie's. He took the letter slowly, his fingers trembling. Lila stepped back, arms crossed over her chest, watching him with a cautious kind of curiosity. "I didn't read it," she said. "Mum said it was for you. She hid it in my old storybook. I forgot it was there." Dominic nodded. He carried the letter into the study and closed the door behind him. For a moment he just stood there, staring at the name written across the paper. He was afraid of what Natalie might have said, afraid it might confirm everything he suspected, and worse, everything he hadn't. He sat down, unfolded the letter, and began to read. "Dominic, if you're reading this, it means I failed to keep our daughters out of the shadows forever. And I'm sorry. I tried. I didn't want them to grow up in hiding, but I couldn't let Jessica near them, not after what she said." Dominic's throat tightened. He kept reading. "She came to see me, found me after Sophie disappeared. She knew about Lila. I don't know how. She said if I ever told you, she'd take them from me. Said she'd do to them what she did to your daughter." I didn't believe her at first. Then she showed me a photo, a picture of Sophie, alone. I don't know where she got it, but I saw the fear in my daughter's eyes. That's when I knew. Jessica wasn't just vengeful, she was dangerous. Dominic's hands gripped the pages so hard they nearly tore. I had to disappear, for them. I moved, changed names, hid everything. I told Lila enough to protect her, but never enough to scare her. And Emmy, she was too young. I didn't want her to remember fear. Just warmth. But if something ever happened to me, I needed to know someone would come for them. That someone was you. You were always more than the mistakes we made. You were the one person I believed could protect them without losing yourself in hate. So if you find them, love them. Not because they're yours, but because they're brave, and because they carry both our hearts. Natalie. Dominic dropped the letter and buried his face in his hands. Everything Natalie had feared was real. Jessica had known about the girls, and Sophie, she had been used as leverage. He stood slowly, the letter still trembling in his hands. He walked back into the living room where Lila and Emmy were curled up with a blanket and a movie. Lila looked up first. Was it bad? He knelt in front of her, voice raw. No, it was honest. It was love. Then, after a pause, and it confirmed something. Lila tilted her head. Jessica, my ex-wife. She knew about you, about Natalie. She threatened her. That's why your mom ran. Lila's face went pale. You mean all that time? We were running from your past? Dominic nodded slowly, and in that moment, the truth between them was no longer a wall. It was a door, and they had just opened it. Lila sat in stunned silence, her fingers tightening around the edge of the blanket. Emmy looked between them, sensing the tension but not understanding it fully. Dominic remained kneeling in front of them, his face pale but calm, as if he was holding something fragile in his hands and couldn't afford to drop it. We weren't just running from the streets, Lila said quietly. We were running from her. Yes, Dominic replied, and Natalie did it to protect you. She didn't want to live in fear, but she couldn't risk losing you. She knew Jessica was capable of things no one else saw. But why? Lila's voice trembled. What did we ever do to her? Dominic looked down, gathering his thoughts before answering. You didn't do anything, but Jessica, she always had a need to control. When she found out about Natalie and me, when she discovered I had another daughter, he paused, it broke something in her. I think she blamed you for everything she lost. Lila looked over at Emmy, who was clutching her arm, wide-eyed. Are we safe now? Dominic met her eyes. I don't know yet. But I'll do everything in my power to make sure you are. He stood and paced slowly, his mind already 10 steps ahead. Jessica is living under a new name. She's been off the grid for years, but she's still watching. She had Natalie followed. She knew where you were, which means she could come back, Lila whispered. Dominic nodded grimly. He turned back to them, determination building in his voice. We need to prepare. I'll speak with legal and security teams. I'll register custody formally, get you both protected. And if she comes near you, Lila interrupted, her voice sharper than he'd expected. No. If she comes near us, we decide what happens next. Dominic looked at her. Lila, I'm tired of running, she said. I'm tired of hiding. If she wants to hurt us, let her see we're not scared anymore. Emmy tugged at her sleeve. Will we have to leave? Dominic crouched again, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. No. Not unless it becomes dangerous. I won't uproot you again unless it's the only way to keep you safe, but I promise, this time, you won't be alone. Lila nodded slowly, the fire in her eyes still burning. Then we fight, together. Dominic smiled softly, pride and heartbreak mixing in his chest. Together. Later that evening, while Emmy napped, Lila approached him in the study. She was holding a different photo now, one from the envelope. It showed Natalie younger, smiling beside a hospital bed, holding both baby girls. "I want to know everything," she said. Dominic nodded. "So do I." But neither of them knew that even as they spoke, in a small coastal town not far away, a woman stood staring at the same photo. Her lips curled into a cold smile as she whispered to herself, "I always said they'd come back to me eventually." The next few days unfolded like the quiet before a storm. Dominic moved swiftly but deliberately, working behind the scenes to secure the girls' future. He contacted his legal team, arranging for emergency custody filings, and hired a private security consultant to review the apartment's safety. Cameras were discreetly installed, locks upgraded, a panic protocol written and memorized. But through it all, he tried to keep life normal. School visits, movie nights, warm breakfasts. He didn't want Lila and Emmy to feel like prisoners of his past. He wanted them to feel for the first time like home meant something. And for a little while it worked. Lila began to open up more, telling stories about her mother, showing Dominic a few drawings she kept hidden in a battered notebook. She asked questions too, about his life, about Sophie, about the woman she only now realized had tried to erase them both. But she never asked to meet Jessica, not once. Then on a quiet Thursday afternoon, while Emmy was napping and Dominic was reviewing security footage from the front entrance, the doorbell rang. It wasn't a scheduled delivery. He checked the monitor and froze. A woman stood at the door, slender, dark sunglasses, expensive coat, a silk scarf tied neatly around her throat. Her hand rested on the intercom. Dominic's chest constricted. Jessica. He hadn't seen her in nearly 10 years, but he would know that posture, that carefully curated poise anywhere. Even in disguise, even aged by time and bitterness, he knew. She pressed the button. Her voice came through, calm and cold. "Dominic, I know you're in there. We need to talk." He didn't move. She waited. Then, with a faint smile, added, "It's about our daughter." Dominic opened the door just an inch. "You mean the one you disappeared with?" Jessica removed her sunglasses slowly. "No, darling, I mean the other one." He clenched the edge of the door. "You don't get to talk about her." Jessica tilted her head. "Oh, but I do. You see, I kept your secrets far better than you ever deserved. I protected your legacy while you played house with a librarian. But now you owe me." "You threatened Natalie," he hissed. "You scared her into hiding." "I warned her," Jessica replied smoothly. "That's not the same thing." "And what did she do?" "She ran, just like I said she would." Dominic's hands trembled. Jessica leaned closer, her eyes hard. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to claim what I should have claimed years ago." He slammed the door before she could say another word. Inside, Lila stood frozen at the hallway corner. She had heard everything. Dominic turned, face pale, voice shaking. "Lila." But she was already walking away, fists clenched, not in fear, in fury. "Let her in," she said without turning around. "You don't get to protect me from this anymore." And with that, the walls they'd built around the past began to crumble. Dominic hesitated, his hand still on the door. "Lila, she's not like other people. She doesn't fight fair. She'll twist things, manipulate." Lila turned around slowly, eyes blazing. "So do I. I just never had the power to use it." He swallowed hard. There was strength in her voice now, a raw, sharpened edge he hadn't heard before. She wasn't a child afraid of monsters anymore. She was a girl who had stared down fear and decided it wasn't going to win. "I need to face her," she said, "because if I don't, I'll always wonder." Dominic nodded reluctantly. "One condition. I'm in the room the whole time." She agreed with a single, defiant glance. He opened the door again. Jessica was still there, waiting, a smirk playing on her lips like she had been rehearsing this moment for years. She stepped inside slowly, her heels tapping against the tile like clock hands ticking toward disaster. Her eyes scanned the apartment with cool detachment until they landed on Lila. "Well," she said, So you're the girl that turned the great Dominic Leclerc into a sentimental fool. Lila didn't flinch. You're the one who made my mom disappear. Jessica's expression flickered. Your mother was unstable. She ran from everything, including the truth. The truth? Lila spat. You mean you? The woman who scared her into burning all her photos and hiding our faces? That truth? Jessica arched an eyebrow. You don't understand how messy adult choices can be. Try me, Lila snapped. Dominic stepped between them. Say what you came to say, Jessica, then leave. She tilted her head, suddenly amused. Fine. You want the truth? She looked at Lila. Your mother seduced a married man, played the victim, got pregnant and ran when she didn't get what she wanted. I warned her, stay away, she didn't listen. Lila's fists clenched. She didn't need your permission. Jessica laughed softly. You're just like her, naive, romantic, but you don't know the whole story. You weren't there when she begged me not to tell Dominic, when she said he wasn't ready for another child, that she'd raise you alone if she had to. Dominic shook his head, voice low. Stop lying. Jessica stepped closer. I'm not lying. I helped her disappear, gave her money, documents. And yes, I threatened her, because I knew if she stayed, she'd destroy what little was left of this family. You destroyed this family, Lila said, voice shaking now. Not her. You stole a little girl, Sophie. You vanished. You erased us. Jessica's eyes glittered. And yet, here we all are. Aren't reunions beautiful? Silence fell like a curtain. Then Lila walked up to her slowly. You don't get to come back and rewrite the story. Jessica blinked, thrown off for the first time. Lila leaned in. You're not the villain in our lives anymore. You're just a footnote. Jessica's mask slipped, only for a second, but Dominic saw it. Fear, not of them, of irrelevance. And Lila turned away, without another word. Jessica stood frozen in the middle of the apartment, lips slightly parted as if she was about to deliver another cutting remark, but the words never came. Lila had already turned her back and walked down the hallway, her shoulders steady, her head high. Dominic stepped in front of Jessica, blocking her view. You came here thinking you could manipulate her, intimidate her, but she's stronger than you ever were. Jessica's voice dropped, brittle and tight. She has no idea what's coming. What is coming? Dominic asked, eyes narrowing. Another lie, another disappearance, another stolen child. Jessica's gaze flickered, then hardened. I protected Sophie. From you. From the fallout. You think I vanished because I was scared? No, Dominic. I vanished because I won. He clenched his fists, fury rising in his throat. Where is she? Jessica smiled, but there was no warmth in it. She's fine, thriving, far away from your world, and she doesn't even remember your name. Dominic felt like the air had been punched from his lungs. He had imagined this moment so many times, finding Sophie, embracing her, explaining everything. But now the image was distant, hollow. Jessica had taken more than just years from him. She had stolen memories before they could even form. Get out, he said, voice low, deadly calm, and don't come near them again. Jessica laughed lightly, as if amused by his attempt at control. You can't stop me. You think a custody document or a security system will keep me away? I've lived in your blind spot for 10 years. I know where your cracks are. Dominic didn't flinch. So fix this, Jessica. Walk away. Stay gone. She studied him for a moment longer. Then, without another word, she turned and walked toward the door. Her heels clicked like a metronome marking the end of an era. As she stepped out into the hallway, she looked over her shoulder. Be careful what you teach that girl, she said softly. She's got your blood, but she's got my fire. And then she was gone. Dominic stood alone in the living room, the echoes of her presence still rattling in the walls. He sank into the couch, the letter from Natalie still tucked into his pocket, the weight of everything crashing over him. Moments later, Lila returned. She gone? She asked. He nodded. For now. Lila sat beside him, quiet. She's not done. No, Dominic agreed. but neither are we." Lila looked at him, the fear replaced by something deeper, resolve. Then Emmy wandered in, rubbing her eyes, oblivious to the battle that had just taken place. "Did we win?" she asked sleepily. Dominic smiled faintly, pulling her into his arms. "Not yet," he said. "But we will." And somewhere far away, in a small seaside town, a teenage girl with Dominic's eyes stared into a mirror, confused by a letter she'd just received in the mail. It was addressed to Sophie Leclerc, and it had no return address. Sophie stared at the envelope for a long time before opening it. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from a strange pull in her chest she couldn't explain. She'd found it slipped under her door that morning. No stamp, no sender. Just her full name written in neat, deliberate letters, Sophie Leclerc. She had never heard that last name before. She lived as Sophie Harmon now. 17. A quiet, intelligent girl who kept mostly to herself. Her mother, Celeste, formerly Jessica, said they'd changed their names for safety years ago, but she had never told Sophie what they were running from. Only that the world beyond their little town was filled with people who didn't understand. Sophie had always felt the lie under those words, and now, as she unfolded the single sheet of paper inside the envelope, her heart beat faster. "Dear Sophie, you don't know me. Not yet. But I've known you your whole life. I'm your father. My name is Dominic Leclerc. I've spent the last 10 years searching for you, hoping, wondering if you were safe, if you were loved, if you'd ever find your way back." Sophie's breath caught. "You were taken from me when you were very young. I don't know what you've been told, but I need you to know the truth, my truth, that I never gave up, that I never stopped believing you were out there. You have sisters, Sophie, 2 of them, Lila and Emmy. They're brave and beautiful, and they carry pieces of your story inside them. You don't know them yet, but I think you'd love them. This letter isn't meant to hurt you. It's only meant to open a door. One you can walk through when you're ready. Whether that's tomorrow or years from now, I'll be here. Love, Dad." Sophie read the letter again and again, her pulse pounding. Her eyes blurred with tears she didn't fully understand. She had no memory of Dominic, no image of his face. And yet, the letter felt real. It felt like something she'd been waiting for her whole life without knowing it. Later that evening, while Jessica, Celeste, was in the kitchen, Sophie sat on the floor of her closet, the letter hidden under her legs. She searched the name online. Dominic Leclerc. Photos flooded her screen. A powerful businessman, a man known for his disappearance from public life, and in one recent article, a grainy image of him standing beside 2 young girls. One of them looked just like her. Sophie's hand flew to her mouth. They had the same eyes, the same chin, the same awkward smile. Her fingers hovered over the contact form on the article's website. Then she whispered aloud to no one but herself, "What if he's telling the truth?" And in a quiet apartment hours away, Dominic sat at the dining table with Lila and Emmy, unaware that at that very moment, Sophie had just found him. Lila was the first to notice the change in Dominic's mood that evening. He was still present, serving dinner, laughing at Emmy's impressions of her new schoolteacher, but his eyes kept drifting to his phone, where a single notification blinked on the screen, unopened. When Emmy excused herself to watch a cartoon, Lila leaned across the table. "What is it?" Dominic hesitated. Then he turned the phone so she could see. An email subject line stared back at them. "I got your letter. From Sophie H." Lila's breath caught. She wrote back. Dominic nodded slowly. Just one sentence, no attachments, no details, but she opened the door. What did she say? He unlocked the screen and opened the message. "I don't know who you are yet, but I want to." That was all. But it was everything. Lila leaned back, blinking fast. "She's real, she's out there." Dominic placed the phone down and clasped his hands. "I haven't replied yet. I didn't want to say the wrong thing." Lila stared at the message for a long moment. "You won't. You're not who she was told you were." "Neither are you," Dominic said gently. "You're not the girl Jessica tried to erase. A silence settled between them, not heavy, but sacred. Then Emmy came bouncing back into the room with a drawing in her hands. "Look, I drew us," she said proudly, holding up a crayon sketch. It showed 3 figures, Emmy, Lila, and Dominic, holding hands beneath a big yellow sun. There was a 4th figure off to the side, alone but smiling. "Who's that?" Dominic asked, pointing. "That's our sister," Emmy said. "Lila said we might have one." Dominic swallowed the lump in his throat. "You're right," Emmy beamed. "I hope she likes cartoons." Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Dominic sat at his desk and began typing a reply. "Dear Sophie, thank you for writing. I know this must be confusing and maybe even scary. I don't expect you to trust me overnight. I only hope you'll let us take small steps together. There's so much I want to tell you. About your childhood, about Natalie, about your sisters. They ask about you every day now. You already matter to them more than you know. If you'd like to meet, just talk. No pressure. We can arrange it when and where you feel safe. I'll wait. As long as it takes. Always, Dominic." He hesitated before hitting send. Then, with a deep breath, he pressed the button. Across the city, in the quiet of her bedroom, Sophie watched the message land in her inbox. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel entirely alone. The days that followed passed with a tense kind of anticipation. Dominic checked his email more than he liked to admit, always half expecting silence. But Sophie wrote back the next morning, "I want to meet. Somewhere public. Just you." Dominic read the message 3 times before responding. "Of course. Wherever you feel most comfortable. I'll be there." She chose a quiet bookstore cafe halfway between her coastal town and the city. Neutral ground, no expectations. When the day arrived, Dominic dressed carefully but simply. No suit, no flash. Just a soft navy sweater, jeans, and the faint scent of the cologne he used to wear when Sophie was a baby. He arrived early and found a table in the corner, heart racing. Every person who entered made him sit a little straighter. Then, 15 minutes past the hour, she walked in. She was tall, slender, with hair pulled back in a low ponytail and a soft grey hoodie tucked into her jeans. Her eyes scanned the room with practiced caution, Jessica's habits, no doubt. But when they landed on him, something shifted in her face. Not recognition, not yet, but curiosity, maybe even hope. Dominic stood slowly. "Sophie." She nodded, and her voice came small but steady. "Hi." He gestured to the seat across from him. She sat down, gripping her coffee cup like it was an anchor. They stared at each other in silence for a long beat. "You look like your mother," he said gently. Sophie's lips twitched. "That's what she always said." He smiled softly. "She was right. But you have my eyes." She looked down, unsure of how to respond. "I don't want to overwhelm you," he continued. "Just being here, it means more than you know." Sophie looked up. "I almost didn't come. I would have understood. She told me you were dangerous, cold, obsessive." He nodded. "I know. But then I read your letter, and I don't know. Something about it felt like a door cracking open. I just needed to see for myself. I'm glad you did." She hesitated. "Did you really try to find me?" "I never stopped," he said, voice shaking. "Even when they closed the case. Even when everyone told me to move on, I couldn't." Sophie looked away, swallowing hard. "Why didn't you come sooner?" "I didn't know where you were. And Jessica, she made sure I never would." Silence stretched again. Then Sophie reached into her bag and pulled out a folded paper. A photo of her as a toddler, barely 2 years old, being held by a man whose face had been torn off. Dominic stared at it, throat tightening. "She tore you out," Sophie whispered. "But I always wondered who was holding me." Now she knew. Tears welled in her eyes. "Is it really true?" she asked. "Do I really have sisters?" Dominic smiled, voice cracking with emotion. "You do. And they can't wait to meet you. Sophie nodded slowly, her fingers brushing the edge of the photo. Then she whispered, "Maybe I want to meet them too." Back in the apartment, Lila sat on the edge of her bed, nervously bouncing her knee as she checked her phone for the 5th time in 10 minutes. Emmy lay sprawled across the blanket beside her, coloring in a new sketchbook Dominic had bought her. Every few minutes, she'd look up and ask, "Is it today? Are we meeting her today?" Lila didn't answer the first few times, but this time she nodded. "Dominic said the meeting went well," she said softly. "She wants to see us." Emmy squealed and threw her arms around her sister. "I'm going to hug her so big." Lila smiled, but there was tension behind it. She'd seen the picture Dominic had sent, Sophie in a hoodie smiling shyly into the camera. There was no denying the resemblance. They looked like versions of the same girl from different timelines, but that didn't erase the years they'd lost. "What if she doesn't like us?" Lila asked aloud, more to herself than to Emmy. Emmy blinked. "Then we'll like her enough for both." Dominic entered the room then, holding a printed photo in his hand, the same one Sophie had brought to the meeting, this time fully restored. She'd scanned it, pieced the missing corner back together and sent it to him. He handed it to Lila. She studied it silently. Her as a baby, Emmy in Natalie's arms, and Sophie on Dominic's lap. Together, before everything fell apart. "She wants to meet at the park," Dominic said, "the one near the bookstore cafe." Lila stood, heart thumping. "When?" "Now." The car ride was quiet. Dominic drove, Emmy hummed, and Lila stared out the window, chewing on her thumbnail. When they arrived, Sophie was already there, sitting on a bench near the fountain, twisting her fingers nervously in her lap. She stood as they approached. Dominic gently nudged Emmy forward. "Go on." Emmy rushed ahead without hesitation and flung her arms around Sophie's waist. "Hi, I'm Emmy, you're my sister. Do you like purple? I like purple." Sophie laughed, her whole body softening. "I love purple." Lila approached more slowly. When their eyes met, everything else fell away. Sophie stepped forward first. "Lila." "Yeah," Lila whispered. "You're really here?" Sophie nodded. "You too." They stood frozen for a moment, unsure what to say. Then Lila reached into her pocket and pulled out the rose bracelet, Natalie's. "She left this for us," she said. "It's yours too." Sophie took it with trembling hands. "I've dreamed of this," she whispered. And then, without another word, they fell into each other, arms wrapped tight, tears blurring their vision, three sisters standing in a circle of memory and hope. Dominic stood a few feet away, watching them. For the first time in 10 years, his family was whole. And for the first time ever, he let himself believe they might actually stay that way. The sun dipped lower in the sky as the three girls sat together on the grass, sharing stories and memories like scattered puzzle pieces, finally sliding into place. Emmy lay in Sophie's lap, giggling as she recounted one of her wild dreams involving flying elephants and jelly bean castles. Lila leaned back on her hands, stealing glances at Sophie like she was still convincing herself this wasn't a dream. Sophie listened, laughed, and then began to speak. Quietly at first, but with growing confidence. She told them about her years in the small coastal town, about how Jessica, Celeste, had always kept them moving, always warned her to trust no one. She admitted how often she'd wondered about a father she couldn't remember, how the ache of not knowing had settled into her bones like cold. "I always thought it was me," she said, voice trembling. "That maybe I'd done something wrong to make him go away." Lila reached over and squeezed her hand. "It wasn't you, it was her. She took everything from all of us." "But she didn't keep it," Emmy added brightly. "'Cause now we're here." Sophie smiled, tears in her eyes. Dominic watched from a nearby bench, his heart full and breaking at the same time. He had imagined this reunion so many times, each version different. But nothing prepared him for the way they looked together. Three girls with his eyes, Natalie's quiet strength, and a bond that not even time or lies could break. He stood and walked over. They looked up at him, his daughters, and for a moment, he couldn't speak. Then Sophie said softly, "Can we take a picture?" Emmy jumped up and ran to his side. "Yes, let's take a family picture." Lila stood too, wiping her eyes. "Do you have your phone?" Dominic nodded, pulling it from his pocket with shaking hands. A passing couple offered to take it for them, and they gathered under a tree, the golden light washing over their faces. Click, one photo. Proof that they had found each other. Proof that love, real, painful, patient love, had won. Later that night, as they returned to the apartment, Sophie wandered into the bedroom she now shared with her sisters. She stood in the doorway watching Lila and Emmy make space for her in the drawers, folding clothes, arguing over pillow colors. Dominic watched her from the hallway, arms crossed. "Are you okay?" he asked. Sophie turned to him slowly. "I think I am now." He stepped forward. "You know, there's so much we still need to talk about. So much time to make up." "I know," she said, her voice steady. "But we'll have time now." Dominic nodded, emotion thick in his throat. "We will." Sophie looked at him, eyes soft. "Can I call you Dad?" He swallowed hard. "Only if you mean it." She smiled. "I do." And as she stepped into the room where her sisters waited, laughter already bubbling up between them, Dominic leaned against the wall and closed his eyes. After everything, after betrayal, heartbreak, and years of silence, his family had returned to him. Not in the way he imagined, but in the only way that ever mattered. Together.